There are moments in history where the impossible happens. Not a miracle, not luck, but a moment where one mind outthinks an entire empire. May 633 AD. The Persian Empire, the Sassanid superpower, has had enough. For months, they have watched a desert army humiliate their border guards. They have lost battles. They have lost commanders. They have lost pride. So, the Emperor, in Ctesiphon, decides to end it. He doesn't just send an army, he sends a death sentence. 2 massive imperial forces are mobilized, one from the north, one from the east. Their orders are not just to defeat Khalid ibn al-Walid. Their orders are to crush him, to squeeze him between 2 walls of iron, until there is nothing left but dust. Most generals, seeing this, would retreat. They would run back to the safety of the desert. But Khalid does not run. Instead, he looks at the trap closing around him, and he smiles. He decides to do something that military theory says is suicide. He walks directly into the mouth of the enemy. He faces an army 3 times his size, and he attempts a maneuver so complex, so dangerous, and so precise that if one single thing goes wrong, his entire army will be slaughtered in an hour. It is a maneuver that has only been successfully executed once before in human history, 800 years earlier, by a man named Hannibal. This is the story of the Battle of Walaja, the day the sword of Allah broke the back of a superpower, the day the desert swallowed an empire, and the day Khalid ibn al-Walid proved that the most dangerous weapon on a battlefield is not a spear, it is a trap that you don't see coming. Welcome to the perfect battle. To understand Walaja, you have to feel the pressure that existed before the first sword was raised. For the Persian Empire, this is not just another raid. This is humiliation stacked on humiliation. A frontier that was supposed to be stable has turned into a wound that won't stop bleeding. News travels fast along imperial roads, faster than armies, faster than supplies, faster than reason. Reports arrive that Persian troops have been shattered, that formations broke, that commanders fell, that elite units trained to fight in disciplined lines were cut apart by forces that moved like wind. In the Persian capital, officials tried to explain it away at first. They blame bad commanders, they blame bad luck, they blame arrogance, and say it will be corrected. But the defeats keep coming. And each defeat does what empires fear most. It changes the psychology of the border. Because once soldiers believe the enemy is unstoppable, the border begins to collapse long before walls fall. Villages begin to doubt the empire's protection. Local allies begin to hedge their loyalty. Tribes that once feared Persian reprisals begin to listen to a different future. The emperor cannot allow that. So he orders a response that is meant to end uncertainty with certainty. He mobilizes a large army under a capable commander, an army designed to hold ground, absorb pressure, and keep the enemy fixed in place. But that army is not the executioner. It is the bait. A second force, heavier and deadlier, is also moving, an imperial hammer that will arrive after the enemy has committed, after the enemy has dug in, after retreat becomes difficult. 2 armies, 1 battlefield, 1 closing movement. A pincer. On paper, it is the kind of plan that ends wars. And it could have ended Khalid's campaign right there in the plains of Mesopotamia. Because Khalid understands something about strategy that most people learn too late. The enemy's best plan is rarely hidden. It is usually obvious. What matters is the tempo. If the Persians can unite their 2 armies, the combined mass will be overwhelming. So Khalid makes a decision that feels reckless until you realize it's the only decision that gives him a chance. He chooses to strike the first army before the second army can arrive. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. He pushes his men hard enough that every step costs something. Dust coats their skin, throats dry out, feet split, horses foam at the mouth. But speed is not a luxury for a smaller force. Speed is armor. Speed is survival. As they move, scouts ride wide. Information pours in. The first Persian army is waiting near Walaja. It has chosen its ground. It is deployed with confidence, and behind it, like the promise of death, there are ridges, rises in the terrain that seem to protect its rear. The Persian commander believes he is setting a web. He believes the enemy will fly into it. Khalid arrives and looks at the same terrain, and he sees the web too. But he also sees something else. He sees that the ridges behind the Persians can hide an entire force. He sees that the enemy's safe rear can become the enemy's most dangerous weakness. And that night, while the Persian camp believes it is waiting for victory, Khalid begins arranging the battlefield like a locked door, not to keep the Persians out, but to keep them in. Walaja is not a famous city. It is a place of open land, ridges, and hard, dry air. A place where the sky feels too large. A place where formations can stretch wide, where cavalry can run without obstacles, where an army can look invincible simply because you can see how many bodies it has. The Persian commander deploys with the confidence of a man who trusts numbers. Infantry form a broad line, dense and heavy. The soldiers carry large shields. Armor glints in the sun. The center is strong, built to push forward and break a weaker line. The flanks are wide, designed to wrap around anything that tries to resist. Behind them are the ridges. To a Persian eye, those ridges are protection. They create a boundary. They reduce the chance of being surprised from behind. To Khalid, those ridges are a curtain, and he understands something about human attention. In battle, people look forward. They look at the threat. They look at the blade in front of their face. They do not look behind themselves until it is too late. That is the first part of his plan. The second part is even more psychological. Khalid wants the Persians to believe he is weak, not in a vague way, not as an insult. He wants them to feel it in their bones. He arranges his army so that, from a distance, it looks thin. The center appears vulnerable. The flanks do not look strong enough to protect the line. The whole formation looks like a force that is brave, but outmatched. This is not because Khalid has no pride. It is because pride is expensive, and he is about to buy something with it. He is about to buy the enemy's confidence. When dawn comes, the Persians begin to move. It starts with sound. Drums, a deep, steady rhythm that carries across the plain like a heartbeat. Then the line advances, thousands of feet pressing into dirt, armor shifting, shields knocking, the front rank lowering spears. The collision, when it comes, is not cinematic. It is ugly. Metal on wood, screams swallowed by dust, the brutal mathematics of bodies pushing against bodies. The Persian infantry fight like a machine, disciplined, heavy, trained to grind. Khalid's men fight with speed and aggression, but the pressure is intense. And this is where the lie begins. Because Khalid allows the center to bend, he does not let it break. He lets it give ground. It is controlled, measured, painful. A step back, hold. A step back again. To soldiers inside that line, it feels like retreat. To the Persian commander watching, it looks like victory unfolding, exactly as planned. The Persian commander begins to believe the story his eyes are telling him. The enemy is weakening. The enemy is breaking. The enemy is about to collapse. And that belief is more dangerous than any sword, because it changes decisions. It changes caution into hunger. The Persians push harder. They commit more bodies to the center. They want the kill. And as they push, their formation changes shape. The line becomes a curve, a crescent. To the Persian commander, this looks like the enemy is folding inward. To Khalid, it looks like a mouth opening, because the more the Persians press into the center, the more they compress themselves. Their ranks crowd, their ability to maneuver shrinks, their rear becomes heavier with bodies and confusion. And behind them, hidden by ridges they thought were protecting them, something is waiting. Not a miracle, not magic, cavalry, silent, patient, ready. The Persians do not see them. The Persians do not even think to look, because they believe they are watching the enemy die. And now, the battlefield reaches the moment that separates ordinary battles from the ones remembered for centuries. The moment where a commander decides whether he is going to win or annihilate. Before the first arrow was loosed, we must understand what the Muslims were looking at across the sand. It is easy to say Persian army and imagine just a crowd of men. But the Sassanid war machine was not a crowd. It was the most technologically advanced military force of its time, rivaled only by Rome. Standing in the front ranks of Andar-Zaghar's army were the Savaran, the elite knights of Persia. These were not like the light cavalry of the desert. These men were encased in steel from head to toe, mail coats, solid breastplates, helmets with chainmail veils that covered the face, leaving only the eyes visible. Even their horses wore armor, leather and felt barding that made them look like prehistoric beasts. When they moved, they sounded like a collapsing building, a wall of iron. In their hands, they held the kontos, a heavy two-handed lance designed to punch through shields and men alike. Facing them stood Khalid's army. The contrast could not have been more terrifying. The Muslim warriors wore leather, some had chainmail, scavenged from previous victories, but many fought in simple cloth tunics. They held light round shields. They fought with slender Arabian swords and bamboo-shafted spears. On paper, This was not a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. Physics dictates that when a heavy object hits a light object, the light object breaks. And the Persians knew this. Historical sources tell us that the Persian officers looked down on the Arabs with genuine confusion. They called them shepherds and lizard eaters. To them, this was not a war against a rival military. It was a riot control operation. But the Persians made a fatal error in their assessment. They measured strength by the weight of the metal. They did not measure the weight of the spirit. The Muslim army possessed a unit that the Persians had no answer for. The Mubarizun, the champions. In Arab warfare, battles did not begin with a general charge. They began with a ritual. A single man would walk out from the ranks. He would strip off his upper armor to show his contempt for death. He would recite poetry about his lineage, his ancestors, and his faith. And he would challenge the enemy's best commander to single combat. This was psychological warfare of the highest order. If the Persian commander refused, he looked like a coward in front of his men. If he accepted and lost, his army's morale would shatter before the main fight even began. At Walaja, we can imagine the silence as these duels took place. The desert wind blowing, the two armies watching, the clash of a heavy Persian broadsword against a quick Arabian scimitar. Every time a Persian champion fell, the myth of Sassanid invincibility cracked a little more. Every time a shepherd killed a knight, the fear in the Persian ranks grew. Khalid used this phase of the battle not just to kill enemy officers, but to buy time. He needed the sun to get higher. He needed the heat to bake the men inside that heavy iron armor. He needed the Persians to be angry, hot, and frustrated before he sprung his trap. The wall of iron was formidable, but Khalid knew that iron has a weakness. If you heat it up and you strike it hard enough, it doesn't just bend, it breaks. We have to pause the battle for a moment. We have to go back to the night before the sun rose, back to the darkness before the drums started. While the main camp slept, Khalid was awake. He called for his two most trusted cavalry commanders, Suwaid ibn Muqarrin, Rafi ibn Amr. These were men who knew how to move without being seen. Men who understood that a horse is not just transportation, it is a weapon of timing. Khalid gave them a mission that sounded impossible. He took 4,000 horsemen, nearly half of his entire cavalry strength. Think about that risk. He was already outnumbered, and now he was voluntarily cutting his own mobility in half. If the main battle went wrong, he would have no reserves to save him. If the infantry line broke, there would be no cavalry to cover the retreat. But Khalid was not planning for a retreat. He ordered Suwaid and Rafi to take their 4,000 riders and vanish. They rode wide, far out into the desert night, away from the campfires, away from the scouts. They navigated by the stars and the shape of the land, circling the entire future battlefield like ghosts. Their destination was the far side of the ridges, the hills directly behind where the Persian army would stand the next morning. They arrived in silence, 4,000 horses, 4,000 men waiting in the dark. Khalid's instructions were strict. Do not show yourselves. Do not move. Do not attack when the battle starts. This is the hardest discipline for a warrior. To sit still while your brothers are dying a mile away, to hear the clash of steel and do nothing, to watch the sun rise and bake the earth, knowing that the battle is raging. And yet you must remain hidden behind a hill of sand. Why wait? Because Khalid knew that timing is more important than force. If the cavalry attacked too early, the Persians would simply turn around and fight them. They had the numbers to handle a rear attack. But if they waited until the Persian army was fully committed, if they waited until every Persian soldier was pushing forward, exhausted, focused entirely on the kill, then the attack would not just be a fight. It would be a shock to the system. So the cavalry waited. Morning came. The heat rose. The sounds of battle drifted over the ridge. Screams, metal, orders. Suwaid and Rafi kept their men steady. They checked their saddles. They checked their lances. They calmed their horses. They were the arrow pulled back in the bowstring. Held, waiting for the finger to let go. Back on the main battlefield, the sun is high. The heat is oppressive. The illusion of the retreating center is working, but the cost is high. Real men are dying to sell this lie. The Rashidun infantry are fighting with a ferocity that defies logic. They are lighter, less armored than the Sassanid heavy infantry. Their shields are smaller, their weapons are simpler. But they have something the Persians do not. They have mobility, and they have conviction. They fight in a style the Persians find frustrating. Strike and move, strike and move. But now, they are being asked to do something different. They are being asked to hold and slowly give way. The Persian line is heavy, like a wall of iron moving forward, shields locked, spears bristling, the weight of thousands of men pushing against the Muslim center. The Muslim commanders in the center are shouting orders to hold the formation together. Steady! Give ground, but keep the line. Every step back is dangerous. If the line breaks too fast, it becomes a rout. Panic spreads, and the army dissolves. If the line holds too firm, the Persians might stop pushing. They might realize it's a trap. It has to be perfect, a fighting retreat, drawing the enemy in, inviting them deeper. The Persian commander, Andar Zagar, watches from his post. He sees the Muslim line bending into a crescent shape. The center is caving in. The flanks are refusing to budge. To a military mind, this looks like a classic breakthrough. The center is weak. If he pushes hard enough, he will punch a hole right through the middle of Khalid's army. And Zagar makes the decision Khalid has been praying for. He commits his reserves. He orders his wings to swing inward. Crush them! Drive them into the sand. The Persian army compresses, soldiers shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, pushing into the funnel. They are so crowded now that they can barely swing their swords. They are focused entirely on the front, on the faces of the Muslims who seem to be failing. They are tired. Sweat stings their eyes. Their arms are heavy from hours of swinging steel. But the adrenaline of victory keeps them moving. They can feel it. The enemy is breaking. Just a little more pressure, just a few more steps. They do not look at the sky. They do not look at the horizon. And they certainly do not look behind them. Khalid, watching from his position, sees the shape of the battle change. The crescent is deep. The Persian army is fully inside the pocket. The trap is primed. He looks up at the sun. He looks at the ridge. It is time. The signal is given. Perhaps it was a flag. Perhaps it was a horn. Perhaps it was a runner sent dashing through the dust. Whatever it was, Suwaid and Rafi saw it. Behind the ridge, 4,000 horses begin to move, a trot at first, then a canter, then a gallop. The sound changes the air, a low rumble that vibrates in the chest before the ear even hears it. The ground shakes. The Persian rear guard, the men at the very back of the formation, turn their heads. What is that sound? Is it thunder? Is it reinforcements? Then they see them, cresting the ridge, silhouetted against the sky. Thousands of riders, lances lowered, swords drawn, rushing down the slope like water breaking through a dam. Allahu Akbar! The cry tears across the battlefield. The Persian soldiers in the rear try to turn. They try to raise their shields, but a phalanx cannot turn. A heavy infantry formation cannot pivot in seconds. The impact is devastating. The Muslim cavalry smashes into the exposed back of the Persian army. Lances shatter, lines crumble, men are thrown forward into their own comrades. At the exact same moment, Khalid gives a new order to his infantry. Hold! Push! The retreating Muslim center suddenly stops. They plant their feet, they lock their shields, and they push back with a fury that shocks the exhausted Persians. The trap snaps shut. The double envelopment. The Persian army is now surrounded on all sides. Front, the Muslim infantry, refusing to yield an inch. Rear, the Muslim cavalry, hammering them from behind. Flanks, Khalid's light horsemen, closing the circle. It is a tactical miracle. A smaller force has completely encircled a larger one. Inside the Persian ranks, discipline vanishes, replaced by terror. Soldiers are pressed so tightly together they cannot lift their arms to defend themselves. They are crushed by the weight of their own army. Orders are screamed, but nobody hears them. Banners fall, and Azaga tries to rally his men. Stand fast! Turn around! But chaos is louder than any general. The Sassanid army, the pride of an empire, the force sent to crush the desert rebellion, has ceased to be an army. It is now just a crowd, a trapped, panicked, dying crowd. The fighting continues until sunset. But the outcome is no longer in doubt. Walaja has become a graveyard. Khalid ibn al-Walid has not just defeated the enemy, he has erased them. We must pause here. The dust is settling on the slaughter of Walaja. The maneuver is complete. But before we look at the consequences, we have to ask a question that military historians have struggled with for centuries. Why? Why did Khalid ibn al-Walid take this risk? Look at the map again. Look at the numbers. He was outnumbered. He was deep in enemy territory. He had no reinforcements coming. Any standard military manual, from the Romans to the modern day, would tell a commander in his position to do one thing: stay together. Keep your force concentrated. defend your flanks. But Khalid did the opposite. He split his army. He weakened his own center. He sent half his cavalry away into the dark. If the Persians had attacked an hour earlier, Khalid would have been destroyed. If the cavalry had gotten lost in the desert night, Khalid would have been destroyed. If the center had broken before the signal, Khalid would have been destroyed. So, was he reckless? Was he gambling with the lives of his men? No. This is the difference between a gambler and a master. Khalid understands the psychology of his enemy better than they understand themselves. He knew that the Persian commander, Andarzaghar, was a safe general, a man who followed the rules, a man who believed in standard formations and standard tactics. Khalid knew that a safe general sees what he expects to see. When Andarzaghar saw the center retreating, he didn't ask, "Is this a trap?" He asked, "Am I winning?" And because the answer felt like yes, he stopped thinking. This is Khalid's greatest weapon, not his sword, not his cavalry, but his ability to feed the enemy exactly the illusion they want to believe. He did it at the Battle of Chains, dragging the Persians back and forth until they were exhausted. He did it at the Battle of the River, striking when they were mostly thirsty. And he did it here at Walaja, using their own aggression against them. It is a concept that Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi would write about 1,000 years later. Make the enemy take the rhythm you want them to take. Khalid does not fight the battle that is in front of him. He fights the battle that is in the enemy's mind. He creates a story. I am weak. I am retreating. And he waits for the enemy to step into that story. This double envelopment maneuver is often compared to Hannibal Barca at the Battle of Cannae, and the comparison is accurate. Both men surrounded a larger army. Both men used a weak center to suck the enemy in. But there is a crucial difference. Hannibal spent years planning his war against Rome. He knew the legions perfectly. Khalid was fighting an empire he had never seen before. He was improvising. He was reading the battlefield in real time, adapting to a superpower with resources he couldn't imagine. To execute a maneuver this complex with an army of tribesmen who were not professional soldiers requires a leadership that borders on the supernatural. His men had to trust him enough to retreat when they wanted to fight. His cavalry had to trust him enough to sit in the dark while their brothers died. That trust is the sword of Allah. It is not just a title. It is the binding force that held the army together when logic said they should break. So, as we look at the ruin of the Persian army, we realize something terrifying about Khalid ibn al-Walid. He didn't win because he was lucky. He won because he knew exactly what you were going to do before you did it. The sun began to set over the plains of Walaja. The noise of battle, the screaming, the metal, the thunder, slowly faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. The dust settled, and it revealed a landscape that had been transformed. Hours ago, a superpower had stood here. Thousands of men, imperial banners, confidence. Now, there was only wreckage. The encirclement had been so tight, so precise, that almost no one had escaped. The bodies lay in heaps, pressed together in the same tight formations they had died in. Armor glinted in the fading light, expensive Persian steel that would never protect another soldier. And Arzagar, the commander who had dismissed the Arabs as flies, was gone. Some accounts say he managed to slip through the lines with a small bodyguard in the final moments of chaos. He fled into the desert. But the desert is not kind to men who do not respect it. He did not find water. He did not find shelter. The man who commanded thousands died alone in the sands, killed by the very thirst he thought he could conquer. For Khalid ibn al-Walid, the victory was absolute. He had done the impossible. With a smaller force, he had annihilated a larger one not by brute strength, but by geometry, by psychology. He sat on his horse, looking over the field. His men were exhausted, their swords were bent, their shields were splintered. They were covered in the dust and blood of a day that had tested them to their limits. But they were alive, and they were victorious. They gathered the spoils of war, and it was immense. The Persian army had brought everything with them: gold, silver, fine weapons, supplies meant to sustain a long campaign. For the simple tribesmen of the desert, it was wealth beyond imagination. Swords with jeweled hilts, silken tents, horses of the finest breeding. But Khalid did not let them rest for long. He knew something they did not. This was not the end. This was just the beginning of a much darker chapter. Because empires do not forgive humiliation, especially not the Sassanid Empire. While the smoke was still rising from Walaja, reports were already coming in from the north. The Second Army, the one led by Bahman, the one Khalid had raced to beat, were still out there, and they were angry. News of the massacre at Walaja spread to every corner of Mesopotamia. It didn't just bring fear, it brought rage. The Persians were mobilizing everything they had left. Local Arab tribes loyal to the Persians were gathering. Christian Arabs, incensed by the defeat of their allies, were arming themselves. They were gathering at a place called Ulais, a place on the river. They were not coming to conquer anymore. They were coming for revenge. Khalid gathered his commanders. He told them to look at the battlefield of Walaja one last time. Remember this, he might have said. Remember how discipline saved you. Remember how patience won the day. Because the next battle, the Battle of Ulais, would not be won by clever maneuvers. It would not be a masterpiece of tactics like Walaja. It would be a meat grinder, a brutal, ugly, desperate struggle for survival. Walaja was a battle of the mind. Ulais would be a battle of blood. Historians look back at Walaja today with a kind of reverence. In military academies around the world, From West Point to Sandhurst, they study the double envelopment. They draw the diagrams, blue blocks surrounding red blocks, arrows curving around flanks. They teach it as the perfect battle. They compare it to Hannibal at Cannae in 216 BC. They compare it to the German encirclements of World War II. But there is a difference. Hannibal eventually lost his war. The Germans lost theirs. Khalid ibn al-Walid never lost. Walaja stands as the crown jewel of his career. It is the moment where raw courage met supreme intellect, where a desert commander proved that he wasn't just a raider. He was a grand strategist on the level of Alexander or Caesar. He proved that numbers do not decide battles. Maps do not decide battles. Generals do. The trap within a trap had worked. The superpower had been crushed. But as the Muslim army turned north, marching toward the sound of the next gathering storm, they knew the truth. The hardest days were not behind them. They were ahead. The river of blood was waiting. The Battle of Walaja remains one of the greatest tactical achievements in human history. It proved that a smaller force, led by a genius mind, can dismantle a superpower. Khalid ibn al-Walid did not just win a battle that day. He rewrote the rules of warfare. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the strategy and the psychology of this incredible encounter. History is filled with forgotten battles, and our goal is to bring them back to life, one map at a time. If you want to see more content like this, more tactical breakdowns, more history, and more stories of the Rashidun conquests, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, which historical general do you think compares to Khalid? Was it Hannibal, Napoleon, Alexander? Let us know your thoughts below. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.